Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of World of Tanks with Gitbag. Now, I was going to do a couple of episodes of World of Tanks this week, but funny story, I went back home to visit my mum over last weekend, came back on Monday, made myself a cup of green tea and coughed up some green tea onto my keyboard, short-circuiting it, and that's why I haven't been able to do a video all week. But I got like a new keyboard yesterday, so I'm doing a video for you guys today, and it's quite a special video actually, because yesterday, on Thursday, I went to see the movie Fury, and man, is that a good movie, I tell you what. I think it's one of the first films where, you know, because there's been a lot of World War II films over the years, and it's one of the first films where it's centred mainly on the crew of a tank. In a weird way, it's a lot like the famous German 1983 film Das Boot, which focused on the lives and tripulations of a World War II German U-boat or submarine crew, and that is an absolutely just gorgeous film. It's brilliant. If you haven't seen Das Boot, see it. You just order it off of Amazon or whatever. But yeah, Fury is much like that in the sense that it's the characters are usually in a confined space, and that creates this sort of sense of camaraderie and claustrophobia at the same time. And it's a very interesting film because a lot of the main good guys in it are just kind of not necessarily good guys actually, but just sort of there doing their job. But I mean, just take my word for it. Just go see the movie. It is brilliant. But to sort of commemorate the release of this film, I thought, you know what? I'm going to get myself the actual tank Fury, because they're selling it for a limited time only in the gift shop in World of Tanks. And here it is, the Fury variant, the Fury model of the Sherman Easy 8. And now, what's different about this from the normal Sherman Easy 8 in the game is it's just all around sort of just not as good. I think it's got a better radio and slightly better traverse, and I think that's, and slightly more health, and I think that's about it. But it's still a good premium tier 6 tank. You know, it's still got that rapid firing 76mm gun, it's quick, it's manoeuvrable, the armour is not very thick, so it can get killed by a lot of tier 5 and 4 guns, but it's still a dangerous machine. Fit it with a medium caliber gun rammer and you'll be laughing. Like, if you fit it with that, then your crew can fire a shell like something like every 2.5 to 3 seconds. It is a very fast firing gun, this 76mm. And what's actually quite cute about this is they've put like a lot of detail into it. They put the wooden logs on the side of the tank from the film, the little German helmet here on the front from the film as well. They've painted the word Fury onto the barrel of the cannon. And what's quite interesting is they've actually, when you buy the tank, they've pre-named the crewmen after the characters from the film. You've got Brad Pitt's character, Don Wardaddy Collier, who's the commander of the tank. Boyd Swan, who's played by Shia LaBeouf in the film, he's your gunner. Trini Garcia, played by Michael Pena, who is your driver. Norman Ellison, who in the film is played by Logan Lerman, who you might remember from Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief, which was released a few years ago. He's your radio operator, and in the film he's the assistant driver. And then Grady Travis, who's the loader. I can't remember the name of the actor who plays Travis in the film, but I mean, yeah, just look it up on IMDb. His name's on the tip of my tongue, but yeah, I mean, it's quite cute how they sort of like named the crewmen after the actual characters in the film. But yeah, I mean, in general, it is pretty much just like the standard Easy 8, just not as good. But of course, because it's a premium tank, it'll earn you more credits and XP in battle. And if you buy it in the gift shop, I think it already comes with a 100% crew, so you can train them up pretty quick straight off the bat. So let's take it into a few games, and while we're doing that, I'll talk about the film. Okay, so here we are in our first match. It's an encounter battle, tier 7 and 6 on Malinovka. Now, what I found quite interesting about the actual film Fury is that like I said a moment ago, it's like the majority of the main good guys in the film aren't necessarily good guys. They're kind of arseholes in a way, and that's because, and that only really applies to Brad Pitt, Michael Pena, Shia LaBeouf, and the big burly guy who plays the loader of the tank in the film. That only really applies to their characters because in the film, they've been sort of fighting together in the same tank since the Americans invaded it. Because the film is set in Germany in 1945, just as the war is about to end, the Second World War. And basically these guys, they've been fighting together since they fight in North Africa. They've been fighting together for 3 years, you know, they've been through hell and back together. And it's kind of sort of, the war has kind of hardened them. And by the time Logan Lerman, who's sort of like the surrogate character for the audience in this film, turns up, they're pretty hardened by war, and you know, the only life they really know at that point is to fight and kill Germans from the tank that they've been riding around in for 3 years, Fury, you know, their beloved Sherman Easy 8. And it's interesting because, like, at the beginning of the film, they've just been in a battle, and like their whole machine gunner and assistant driver has just been killed, and so Brad Pitt, of course, asks for a replacement, and they get Logan Lerman, who is basically is just a fresh rookie. He's been in the tanks for 8 weeks, and he's like a pencil pusher, and so, of course, at first, you know, they don't sort of really sort of, the other main characters don't really rate him at first, which is quite an interesting sort of way of doing that sort of thing, actually, of introducing the audience to the other characters besides the main characters. That like Logan Lerman's character in the film, we don't know much about the characters that the big burly guy, Brad Pitt, Shia LaBeouf, and Michael Pena play, other than they're sort of hardened by war and they've been fighting in this tank for years together. No. It turns out that they're sort of very hardened by this conflict, and that they at first, of course, don't accept Logan Lerman's character, but eventually, you know, sort of vice versa between Logan Lerman and the other crew members. The other crew members, you know, get a bit of humanity injected into them once again before the climax of the film, and Logan Lerman's character is sort of hardened by the conflict. You know, he becomes open to the horrors of war and sort of begins to come to grips with the concept of killing another man, because otherwise he might die himself. And really what's quite interesting about that concept of us being sort of surrogated, or rather Logan Lerman being our surrogate for, you know, being put into the experience of the movie, is that we, like him, are sort of hardened by this experience of how brutal the film is, because the film is, it's bloody brutal, I tell you what, and it is very realistic as well. You've got to applaud the realism of this film. I mean, you have men going into these massive battles, brutal engagements, and, you know, the common sort of consensus amongst people who study history is that when men come out of wars, they come out sort of as heroes. And this film takes a much more realistic approach in the sense that it looks at these men who have been fighting for years, and they fight like heroes, but in reality they're arseholes. So, you know, it takes a much more realistic approach than something like, I'm trying to think what's a good film that sort of portrays men in a brutal war but also heroic. Something like Kelly's Heroes, which is a really good old-fashioned 60s war film. The men in that are kind of portrayed a bit overly sort of heroic, but in this, you know, no such thing. They are proper bastards. probably the exception being Brad Pitt's character, Sergeant Wardaddy, who, while certainly a bit of a rough old git and a bit psychotic to a degree, is probably the most noble of the crew aside from Logan Lerman's character. You know, he sort of takes Logan Lerman's character under his wing in a sense, sort of helps him to sort of harden up to the realities of this conflict, and it's through his actions primarily in the film that we see Logan Lerman become to grips with the concept of killing another man in this war, and through that we come to the grips with the concept of just how brutal the fighting at the end of the Second World War in Germany in July 1945 was. You know, it was vicious stuff. You know, the Germans were on their last legs. They were throwing literally everything they had into the fight. Men, women, children, people on bicycles using Panzerfaust, portable rocket launchers, everything, you name it. They were throwing everything into the fight against the British and the Americans in the West and the Russians in the East. So it definitely gets that down, that these men are hardened by the years of conflict that they've been fighting, and they're hardened even more by this stage in the war, which is so brutal that they have to be themselves even more brutal than their enemy. And I think really that's the best way to get across a message of how bad war is in a movie, is by portraying it as realistically as you can. I'm not trying to diss in any sense films that portray war in sort of a heroic light as, say, Kelly's Heroes or The Dirty Dozen or things like that. Those are good films, but for some reason I tend to feel like they don't necessarily project war in its most realistic sense. I mean, that's kind of a given because they're very sort of heroic and noble warriors, except for a couple of the characters in The Dirty Dozen. A couple of characters in that are right bastards. Such as the character played by the actor who played the TV sort of detective Kojak. I can't remember what his name is. Very famous actor. I'm sure someone will correct me. But I mean, yeah, that's what I think where the main strength of Fury comes from, is its realism and the fact that because Logan Lerman isn't a bastard, we see through his eyes just how brutal the war is, because he's fresh to it, he's new to it, he's never killed before. And to him, and to some degree us at the beginning of the film, the concept of killing and how brutal the war is in 1945 is genuinely shocking. It really is more than a movie in a sense, it's an experience. And I mean, probably the biggest strength, as I said, is the realism of Fury and how we see the experience of the whole battle of the movie overall and the individual conflicts raging within it through the experience that Logan Lerman's character Norman has. You know, it's less like a movie, more like an experience in a sense. I know I keep saying that, but it really is. You know, I mean, and then of course the other biggest strength of the movie is its battle scenes. Holy shit, they're intense. They are really something, I'll tell you what. And it's what's quite interesting is, like, as the film progresses, you see the battle scenes become more and more intense, and through that we are sort of more hardened. We just get more of an experience of how brutal this war is, and how much Logan Lerman changes throughout the course of the film. And I don't know if they go a bit overboard with it. I don't think so, really. I mean, I haven't really heard any complaints about that so far. But I mean, probably the best fight scene is the last one, where the main characters are driving along in Fury and they come across an anti-tank mine, accidentally hit it, and then they have to hold the line just in their immobilised tank against a good couple of hundred SS tank buster infantrymen. And it is without a doubt one of the best action scenes I've ever seen in a film. I'm not even kidding, it is really that good. And really, the whole film just builds up to this climax. I mean, of course it does, because that's what a film does. It builds up to the ending, and then it sort of has this big explosion of emotion or reveals or action or whatever. I mean, there are of course a couple of exceptions to that over the years, like The Big Lebowski. That film is, it's very strange. It's a very, very good film, but the weird way it just kind of stops at the end. It doesn't have a climax of sorts. But with this, with Fury, the end is explosive, it's violent, It's these guys stuck in this demobilised tank, fighting off against like a good couple of hundred, like an entire battalion of SS tank buster infantry, and you see them just use everything at their hands, everything at disposal, just to hold on, to just hold the SS back, to give their comrades time to prepare their defences. They throw out smoke grenades, they use their pistols, they get out of the tank and use their submachine guns. They use up all the remaining high explosive and white phosphorus ammo they've got in their tank. It is mental. It is really explosive. And there are a couple of other really good action scenes in this film as well. There's the probably the most iconic from the trailer, at least, is the scene where the tank Fury and a couple of other Sherman tanks go up against one of the legendary German Tiger heavy tanks. And the Tiger had an 88mm gun that was capable of knocking out basically any variant of the Sherman in one shot, even the mighty Sherman Jumbo. And it's this really intense scene where Brad Pitt has taken command of these three Shermans, and he leads them round, just swarming this Tiger in a desperate effort to just get round behind it and put some shots into its rear armour, because that was the only way that the Sherman, and indeed the Sherman Easy-8, could actually damage the Tiger, is by getting behind it and putting the Easy-8's 76mm gun to use, by putting armour-piercing rounds into the back of the Sherman, because that was the only way, even with the 76mm gun on the Easy-8, that the Sherman could do feasibly any consistent damage to the Tiger tank. Because many people kind of tend to overrate the Tiger tank in terms of its fearsome reputation. I mean, it did have a fearsome reputation. It caused massive casualties amongst the tanks of the Americans, British and Russians during the Second World War. But that's primarily because Germans had experienced tank crews, very good radios, and good coordination between their tanks and other ground forces. I mean, the Tiger was thickly armoured. It had a big, powerful 88mm gun. It had a good radio, and it usually had good, well-trained, experienced crews. But at the same time, it was mechanically unreliable. It guzzled fuel, and it was heavy, so it couldn't really go across many different types of bridges. So, in many ways, it probably saw the most success as a defensive weapon during the Battle for France, or the Russian advance through Eastern Europe. But I mean, it still had a fearsome reputation, and rightfully so, because it was used just so much more effectively than any of the tanks in the Russian or American arsenal during the Second World War, and indeed the British arsenal as well, actually. I mean, the British didn't have any tank of their own that they designed that could feasibly stand up to the Tiger one-on-one, except for, of course, perhaps the Sherman Firefly, which was basically a variant of the American M4 Sherman that was fitted with a British 17-pounder anti-tank gun. That could absolutely cane the Tiger tank, but still, it was very sort of flimsily armoured. And in fact, the Germans actually called the Sherman the Tommy Cooker because its armour was so thin and its ammo was stored so close to its engine that if it was hit by just one 88mm shell, it would just cook off the whole tank would just cook off and the whole crew would just burn up inside the tank. And so hence the reason why the Germans first came across the Sherman, being driven by British crews in North Africa in 1942. They called it the Tommy cooker because that's pretty much what it did. It cooked British Tommies. And I mean, you could say that even despite the Tiger's mechanical failures, it was still deserving of its fearsome reputation, and it certainly was, and it shows when the main characters come across one of the Tiger tanks in the actual film. They are literally unable to do anything to it from the front, and they have to swarm around it, get behind it. It is a really intense action scene, and I mean all the action scenes in the film are bloody intense, but that one in particular is very it's just gut-wrenching, because it's the only sort of tank-on-tank battle in the film. Which isn't to say that any of the others are any less good, but I mean, you just see how sort of inferior the weapons of the American tanks are against the German tanks, and that's a very sort of big point they make in the prologue before the actual film begins, is that the Americans were suffering such heavy casualties because the guns of their tanks were no match for the majority of German tanks fighting against them in France and Germany at the end of the Second World War. And in all fairness, I think something like a tank film hasn't really been attempted for a very long time. I mean, there was Kelly's Heroes way back in the day, but that was quite a different kettle of fish, really, when you think about it. And that was more about the heroism of war and, you know, lovable rogues, whereas Fury is just about bastards doing the job that they're being sent to do and fighting like heroes, but actually being kind of jerks, really. And I've got to give a hell of a lot. I mean, the actors in the film are good. Even Shia LaBeouf, who I don't usually even like that much. I've got to give massive credit to the director, David Ayer. He, in my opinion, this is probably his best film yet, without a doubt. I mean, the guy is talented. He is a talented director, and I think this... I want him to go on and do more bigger projects and stuff. And I think this film is going to really help, because it's a damn good film. It's a really good, realistic war film, and hell, he's done a bloody good job on it, I'll tell you that. And I mean, you could have gotten a few other directors to direct this, who are good at directing brutal war films. Like Steven Spielberg did really well on the first 20 minutes of, say, Saving Private Ryan, but then of course Saving Private Ryan became a little bit schmaltzy by the end of the film, which I'm not going to sort of discount Saving Private Ryan as a good film. Saving Private Ryan is an amazing film, but, you know, the first 20 minutes and the last 35 minutes are so much better than the rest of the movie overall. Whereas with Fury, the quality of it is just consistent throughout. And I'm really happy about that, because not just because I had a good time at the movies and because it was an amazing experience, because I like good movies, but also just because I think, like, David Ayer has clearly shown with this that he's a talented guy and that he can do really well. And that I hope because of this he'll go on to do bigger and even greater bits of work than Fury. I mean, I really hope so, because he deserves to. I mean, he's shown he's talented enough. And I mean, really, there's not much else you can say about the film. I've already discussed kind of like the greater sort of philosophical sort of musings I've had about the film, but really it just boils down to being a damn good action film about the horrors of war and about how the innocent are sort of hardened by it. I wouldn't really say it's a date night movie, to be honest. I mean, you can probably tell from what I've told you about it already, but still, regardless, whatever the case is, go see Fury. It's a damn good movie. I'd give it a good, say, 8.5 out of 10 at least. It is a bloody good movie. It is well worth it. But until next time, I'll catch you guys on the battlefield.